Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we are comparing the 2021 Lotus Evora GT with a 6-speed manual transmission against the 2022 Porsche 718 Cayman GT4, also with a 6-speed manual. Both of these are modern, mid-engine, driver-focused sports cars that cost a little over $100,000 when new, and on paper, they are so close. This Evora GT is powered by a 3.5-liter supercharged Toyota V6, making 416 horsepower and 317 pound-feet of torque. It sends all that power to the rear wheels via a 6-speed manual transmission. It has a limited slip differential, and the car weighs a little over 3,100 pounds. That's very close in specs compared to that 718 GT4. But more on that in a few minutes. In my opinion, the two crucial differences between these two cars, the Evora GT uses a more traditional hydraulic steering rack, whereas the GT4 uses an electric power steering rack, and the Evora has front double wishbone suspension, whereas the Cayman GT4 uses McPherson strut. We'll see what difference that makes and how these two cars feel in terms of their front end response and overall grip. We've got some Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2 tires on the Evora GT, 245 in the front, 295 in the rear. This particular car, spec'd out in this amazing shade of green, has a ton of carbon fiber along the top. We have a carbon roof, a carbon rear deck lid. This is the exact spec I would want to get my Evora GT in. Now, being a British hand-built car, that comes with a number of quirks. The interior, while overall very nice, I wouldn't say feels like necessarily a over $100,000 car. We do have some Alcantara all on the dashboard, Alcantara and leather wrapped steering wheel, but some of the buttons look a little bit chintzy if you ask me. The air vents feel like they're pulled out of a much cheaper car, which they probably are. And the head unit is, essentially an aftermarket Alpine unit. But enough of that, let's see how the Evora GT drives. Press this middle button to disable the immobilizer, then turn the key, clutch in, then engine start. Not that difficult, I guess, but that extra little step of pressing the button on the key is just, it always baffles me. All right, so for drive modes, we're gonna put it into race, which turns off traction and stability. It opens the exhaust valve, and it heightens the throttle response. Now the pedal box is slightly offset to the right, as this is a mid-engine car with a decently wide front tire. We're on fixed suspension here. There are no adaptive dampers, even as an option for the Evora GT. Driving slowly, I gotta say, the suspension feels really good. It has good compliance while offering a lot of firmness and good body control in the corners. Exactly what you'd want for a daily drivable sports car. Definitely weird throttle response. The last time I drove a manual Evora GT, I felt the same thing. The throttle blip required to get this thing downshifted with a proper rev match, it's tricky to say the least. Such good steering feel with this hydraulic rack. It's insanely good. So much information about the road texture being transmitted through the wheel, just the right amount of weight to the steering. My God, it loads up so nicely in the corners. The double wishbone suspension. The front end of this car feels so sharp, not race car sharp, but definitely the perfect balance for a GT. After all, this is an Evora GT. It's not a race car, it's not a track car, it's an everyday sports car. Wow, these brakes, these AP Racing brakes, they are so good. They're so natural, progressive, linear, pedal feel. They really reward you for squeezing that pedal. It's not an on-off switch. It's not overly sensitive like many modern sports cars and their braking systems. wishbone front suspension, and a Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2 tire. Oh man, such a good combo. And don't forget the hydraulic steering. I keep harping on about this steering rack, but it is one of the highlights of this car for me. The engine is good, it makes good power, good mid-range torque, it revs out to around 7,000 RPM, but it's not the highlight of the car for me. It doesn't make a fantastic sound. Oh man, so good. Lotus just knows how to make some of the absolute best sports cars in the world. In terms of driving dynamics, this really is, I think, second to none for right around $100,000. But I guess that's the point of this video, isn't it? We need to see if that 718 GT4 is as good or better to drive. I love these brakes. I love this steering. I love this front end. Hell, even this 6-speed manual feels fantastic. The last manual Evora GT I drove had a kind of clunky shifter that was difficult when doing the 3-to-2 downshift, but not here. I guess it could be a quality control issue. This one just feels so good, so mechanical. No question where each gate is. Yes, this car just communicates with the driver so well. Oh my God, guys, I am in love with this car. I didn't fall in love with the first manual Evora GT I drove, which is just weird. This one is so perfect. Look at the way the suspension just handled that big bump back there. One compression and rebound and it settles right away. That's what you want, especially considering this is non-adaptive suspension. I mean, that's the way to go, isn't it? A proper suspension setup in a street-focused sports car should just work. It should be comfortable. It should also give you great handling, and that's exactly what this setup provides. Let's do one little straight line pull here, and then hop into that 718 GT4. I actually felt the rev limiter kick in just before the indicated 7,000 RPM red line. That's a little strange. But either way, this engine, it's not that special. It makes a good sound. It's a unique sound. You get just a little bit of supercharger whine to complement the natural sound of the V6. But it doesn't give you that howl, that high RPM shriek that you might expect when you see a car like this Lotus Evora GT. It's a very exotic looking machine from the outside, but when you drive it, the engine definitely is not the highlight. I suspect that's not going to apply at all to that Cayman GT4. Speaking of Cayman GT4, it's right behind me. Time to swap places with Kevin from the Jabal and Cars YouTube channel. Time to find out if the new 718 GT4, I guess not so new, but new to me as I haven't driven this generation yet. Let's see if it's better than the Evora GT. This one's going to be very hard to beat. All right, guys, we're now in the 2022 718 Cayman GT4. I've been wanting to drive this car for so damn long, ever since it came out. It's been, what, 2 to 3 years now? Yeah. Yeah, so this is its owner, Muiz. Hey. He's been nice enough to let me take his GT4 for a spin. This particular one is pretty much all stock, except you have an Akrapovic exhaust. Yeah, it's a titanium overaxle pipe and a sole valve controller. Other than that, the car is all stock. So basically you can use the home link buttons to actually open and close the valves, right? Yeah, you have a remote, or you can link it up to the home link, and I decided to do the home link one instead, so yeah. I absolutely love that. You can keep it nice and quiet, subdued when you're just putting around town, and then when you're in the canyons or on a track, open that thing up. This car weighs a little under 3,200 pounds. Maybe this one with the 18-way power seats might be closer to 3,200. We're powered by a 4-liter naturally aspirated flat 6 engine that makes 414 horsepower and around 309 pound-feet of torque. If you compare these two cars on paper, they're within like 1 to 2% of each other. Horsepower, torque, weight, I mean, even the fact that both have 6-speed manual transmissions, rear-wheel drive, limited slip differentials. Even the seating position is basically identical. This has McPherson strut front suspension, an electric power steering, Porsche's PASM setup. We're gonna drive it in the softer mode to start. Let's take this thing for a drive. Speaking of the interior, before we get started here, this is a better built interior compared to the Lotus. I mean, this is a German car versus a British car, that one being hand built. That being said, does it feel as special? I guess it depends. I think the Lotus has a little bit more flair to it. This has a more kind of serious feel to it, which is exactly what you'd expect from any Porsche, BMW. Name your favorite German car manufacturer. All their interiors have a very serious feel. All the driver inputs are very nice. We have a nice 3-spoke steering wheel, perfect width to the rim. Shift knob feels nice, leather and metal, although the actual shift quality, which I'll show you more as we get going here, actually not as mechanical as the Lotus. Excellent brake feel. This engine sounds so good, man. So easy to heel toe. Love the pedal placement. There's more room in the footwell in this car compared to the Lotus. It makes pedal work just that much easier. Outrageous sound. There's the red line, almost 8,000 RPM. I guess we short shifted a bit, but it sounds damn good even just above 7,500. I can just fire off downshifts in this car in a way that I simply cannot in the Lotus. With that supercharger, the way it's tuned, the throttle response, it's just so inconsistent. This one, you know exactly what you're gonna get every single time. If you mess up a rev match, it's completely on you, the driver. It's not the car's fault. It's a far superior sound to that Camry V6 with a blower on it. There's no two ways about it. Much more firm brake pedal, which we like. It's very linear progressive. You know, I said I love the brake feel in that Evora GT, and I do, but this inspires even more confidence. It's got a little bit more initial bite. Very long gearing. We can actually use second gear in this sweeper. I mean, second gear goes to like over 80 miles an hour, I believe. So the suspension is interesting. Even in the softer mode, there's a little bit of extra motion. Let's actually try PASM on. See what kind of difference that makes. has them on. It is, you know, firmer, a little bit harsher, but it does, I feel like it gives me a little bit more control in the corners. As long as you're not driving on an extremely bumpy section of road, the stiffer setting works. With that said, now that it's bumpy, let's back it back off. Oh man, the GT4 is so good. I love the brake feel. Let's talk about the front end for a second. Electric power steering, McPherson strut front suspension. Given that it has those two things, which in the modern world of, you know, driving enthusiasts and performance cars, those two things are often poo-pooed on, right? They result in a lack of steering feel typically and understeer. In this car, you don't really feel much of either. I think the steering feel in this car, you can very precisely place the front end, but that Evora GT is on a whole different level of steering feel. You feel every little pebble, every little reflector on the road when you drive over it with your front tires. You do not get that sensation here. Does that make this worse? Only if you're looking for feel and not necessarily precision. I think there's no difference in precision between the two front ends of this car versus the Evora GT. If anything, this feels a little bit more precise, but you don't get that kind of tingly shiver up your spine that you get when you just feel everything about the road surface. That's what's missing in this car. It's more clinical, but it's not as emotional. When we talk about engine, the engine in this car is miles better, and I would say even more emotional. It's more clinical and more emotional. Better throttle response by far. You can nail your downshifts in this car with a perfect blip every single time, and it sounds absolutely freaking fantastic at 8,000 RPM. Keep in mind that Lotus, despite it having a 7,000 red line, I felt the rev limiter kick in around 6,800. Kind of a letdown. So I will say that the transmission in the GT4 is lower effort, and you can really speed shift this thing, which is great on a racetrack. But again, it's more clinical, less emotional. In the Evora GT, you can almost feel the linkage every single time you shift. You can feel a very pronounced clunk when you get into every gate, but you can't speed shift it as easily because the linkage just feels stiffer. Now I think when you get to drive Brandon's Evora GT, I think you'll feel exactly what I'm saying. The steering information you get is on another level.
Yeah, that's what I heard. I've driven in a lease, and I can vouch for that, but I haven't really driven a Evora yet, so I'm looking forward to trying that out. Don't
expect quite at least levels of steering feel. I think that steering rack is unmatched, at least from my experience, for a road legal car.
Okay.
But it's pretty damn close.
Great.
Now once we back off here, it's a perfectly livable car. Yeah, close that exhaust valve and you know, all the droniness goes away, and yeah, we get a little bit of NVH, a little bit of tire noise, but I mean, what else do you expect from a, you know, 3,200 pound car with Cup 2 tires? But how do the two cars compare in my mind? Let's talk about price for a second. You said they stopped production of the GT4 already, right?
Unfortunately, yeah. The GT4 and the Spider, they're prioritizing the 4RS, and I guess the new Spider RS as well. That
actually is the same situation with the Evora GT. Now that the Emira is coming out, the Evora GT has no longer been produced, actually, I think for a year or two. And on the used market, I've seen Evora GTs with a manual transmission, low miles, for right around $95,000 to $100,000. These GT4s are kind of still an appreciating asset. These are still going for $120,000 to $140,000. I mean, the original MSRP without any options is right around, what, $105,000, give or take?
Yeah, for a 2023 model year, the most recent one, they jacked up the MSRP to $105,000.
Which is very close to that.
Yeah.
But if you actually want to own one of these in the used market, you're not paying $105,000 for a GT4. Is that extra money worth it? I mean, that's completely subjective, but I think if you want a car that you just want to take out on the weekends and have a good time with, the Evora GT offers a much more emotional experience in most ways, outside of, you know, things like the engine, the throttle response. But if you want a clinical track weapon, a car that you can carve canyons or your local track very precisely and accurately, and with great overall performance levels, like quantitative performance, I think it's not even a question. The GT4 is still the gold standard for a reason, and even at $130,000-ish, I think it's worth the extra money over the Evora GT. I actually tracked the manual Evora GT at Sonoma. It was a very playful, willing dance partner of a car, but it's not a car I got into a very smooth rhythm with. I feel like I feel more comfortable driving this car on a canyon road than I did driving that on a smooth racetrack. That really goes to show like the amount of engineering that Porsche has put into the GT products. And this being the entry-level GT product, you still get all of that. Again, just the precision. That's the word I keep coming back to, but that's the way I would describe the GT4. So let me know what you guys think about the Evora GT versus 718 GT4 comparison. Are there any other cars in this price range that are actually worth considering over either of these two? Thank you guys for watching. A big thank you to Moise, and a big thank you to Brandon for letting me drive their mid-engine sports cars, and I'll see you guys in the next one.